Ahoy, adventurers! Joe Buddy Hambone here with another coupon code from our friends over at Noble Knight Games. This month, the code is ROLLDICE, and it is good through September 7th for $6 off orders of $25 or more, either online or in person. Now, you heard me right. It is $6 off orders of $25 or more, either online or in person, using the code ROLLDICE. And hey, it's back to school season, so if you're already out there picking up some pencils and papers, why not get yourself a new set of dice or maybe a brand new RPG to kick the fall season off right? Use the code ROLLDICE. And if you're shopping at Noble Knight Games already, on August the 10th, which is the day this episode airs, Noble Knight Games is doing their free RPG Day online event. They're kicking it off with a special deal that for every $15 you spend, you can obtain any of the RPG Day promo items for only a penny. Be sure to check out their website for more details on that. And don't forget to use the code ROLLDICE to get $6 off an order of $25 or more, either online or in person, now through September 7th, from your friends and mine, Noble Knight Games.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the editor-in-chief of Unwinnable.com. The last movie tie-in he bought was in a Happy Meal, Stu Horvath.
Probably.
It feels right, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, granted, like, I don't often eat at McDonald's, and I often don't get Happy Meals if I do eat at McDonald's, but I remember like being a kid and all the good movie tie-ins used to come in the Happy Meal.
Yeah.
So the fact that we are talking about a movie tie-in today that did not come with a quarter pounder and fries is really interesting to me. How you doing today, Stu?
Pretty good. How are you?
Pretty good. So today, what are we talking about?
We are talking about The Green Knight role-playing game from A24 Studios, a tie-in to their forthcoming Dev Patel film.
So weird. Like, I saw it and I thought it was like a thing where this is a total just ad for the movie. Like, there's no way that they're actually going to make an RPG for this movie. Because, I mean, how often does an independent film get a movie tie-in?
Yeah.
Right?
Right. You know, A24 has developed a pretty impressive stable of movies, and they support them in unique ways. They have, like, those script books for The Witch and Moonlight and Ex Machina, I think. And they're actually really nice, well-made books. You just get the sense that A24 cares about the movies that they distribute.
I mean, it is clearly evident when I take a look at this box set.
So before we get into the box set, we should probably let folks know what the movie is about. It's an adaptation of an old poem called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It's like a deep dive into like the clash between personal honor and knightly duty. Both of those things which modern audiences don't have a lot of context for. Like, the world has moved on. So both those systems of thinking are kind of outmoded and largely illogical to, I think, modern audiences. And so I feel like the poem doesn't make a lot of sense. Guy shows up at King Arthur's court at Christmas time, and he's like, I have a challenge. You know, somebody hit me with a sword, and then next year I get to hit you with a sword. And people are like, no. And then King Arthur's like, all right, well, if nobody else is going to do it, I'll do it. And then Gawain's like, no, hold on, I'll do it. And so he takes the knight's axe and chops his head off. And then they're like, okay, that's the end of that. Except the knight stands up, picks up his head, and says, well, see you in a year. You know? So, like, it's already like, what?
Well, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. So then Gawain goes on a journey up north, and he winds up staying at this fella's castle and explains where he's going. The guy's like, oh, yeah, it's just 2 more miles up the way. You got a couple days. Why don't you stay with me? So he does, and they hang out together, and they make a deal. The lord of the castle says, I'm going to go hunting every day, and I will give you what I catch if you give me whatever you get during the course of your stay here. So that's like the deal, right? And the next morning, the guy goes off hunting, gets like a boar. Meanwhile, Gawain's been hanging out in the castle, and the fella's wife takes a liking to him and tries to seduce him. And Gawain's like, no, that's not cool. But she gives him a kiss anyway. So when the guy gets home, Gawain gets the boar, And then Gawain's like, well, I guess I got to kiss you. So he gives him a kiss. So this goes on the next day. It's 2 kisses and 2 boars. And then the third day, like, the lady is just like, I'm revving to go. And Gawain's still not having any of it. And she's like, well, take this ring. And he's like, no, I can't do that. And then she's like, well, take this belt. It's a green sash. And she's like, it has magic powers. It'll help you. And then she kisses him 3 times. And he's like, okay, I can't say no to the woman because my knightly vows say that I can't disappoint the lady, but at the same time I have this obligation to my host. It's like this weird tension of stuff that, like, as modern audiences, we're just like, what's wrong with you? Like, what is this whole thing? Somebody's gonna chop your head off in 2 days.
Because like modern audiences, they just would have banged already.
Yeah.
Which is not very knightly.
Yeah, no, not at all. So Lord of the Manor comes home with 3 boars, gets 3 kisses. Gawain, leaves out the belt. Next day, Gawain goes off to the Green Chapel to meet the Green Knight. Green Knight is like, all right, it's time. And he's about to take his axe and hit Gawain in the neck with it. And Gawain flinches. And he's like, wait. We got to do over because, like, that's not cool. Like, I'm a knight. I can't flinch. So the Green Knight's like, okay. So they set it up again. This time, Gawain doesn't flinch. And the Green Knight brings the axe down, but stops right at his neck. And then Gawain's just like, dude, come on, I was ready. That's messed up. And then they do it again, a 3rd time. And this time, the Green Knight just nicks him in the back of the neck and reveals himself to be the Lord of the Manor, explains that this was all just like a test of his honor and that Morgan Le Fay put them up to this. And basically, really, all it was she was hoping to scare Guinevere to death when, his head got cut off down at Camelot last year. The end.
Okay.
Yeah, it's weird. It's hard to, like, hook into.
In fairness, around this time when they're writing stories, they didn't exactly have a whole lot of other things to riff on and steal from, so cool, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Gawain goes home and he thinks he's dishonored himself, but, like, when he gets back to Camelot, they're like, yeah, no, you did okay. Like, you had to weigh the obligation to your host to your obligation to courtly love, and you did okay. You did good, guy. And, like, all of those things are very alien concepts for us. And that's what this movie is based on. Although the movie looks very much more in the mode of sort of like a Midsummer or like folk horror movie, very nicely filmed, in the independent kind of horror movie style. And I'm sure it's going to go in different directions. And I'm sure of that because I've read the rules to the role-playing game, which sort of gives a little bit of spoilers to the approach. They understand that it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, so they had to tweak some things. And I think it works pretty good. Now let's talk about the actual role-playing game, right?
Yeah, the meat of the show.
Yeah. 9 minutes on this old poem. So the box, man, the box is heavy. It's thick. It's like you could hurt somebody if you threw this box at somebody. I've never encountered a role-playing game box set with the thickness and sturdiness of cardboard that the Green Knight box set has. So right off the top, I feel like my purchase has been justified because, like, you could sit on this thing and it'll support your weight.
So right off the bat, my first question to you is not so much of the sturdiness, but how does it fit against the other box sets on your bookshelf?
It fits snugly because my shelves are packed, but it's a little bit taller than your standard 2nd edition era D&D box set.
Is it as heavy as the Chaosium starter set for Call of Cthulhu?
It's more so, but it's that style box. What's weird, too, is that if you lift the lid of the box off, there is another lid inside that has a circle cut out. You can see the picture of the Green Knight on the rule book inside. It's like totally unnecessary use of cardboard, but I like it. It's a nice design touch. You get a rule book, character sheets for each of the 5 classes. You get a really nice black and green D20, and you get a rather useless world map.
So wait, you only get a D20 with it?
Yeah, that's all it needs.
Really? It doesn't need any other kind of dice?
Yeah, so the game is really simple. As you can imagine, the rules are maybe 6 pages. You have a range of skills and attributes that you basically select. And in doing so, you could use those skills and attributes in skill tests for a bonus. Any action that you do in the game is a skill test. And it's all calibrated towards one binary, which is honor and dishonor. But if you're doing an honorable roll, you have to roll meet or above your dishonor. So, at the beginning of the game, it's 10. Do a whole bunch of honorable things, your dishonor goes low. And if you're doing a dishonorable act, you have to meet or get lower than your dishonor. Simple.
Yeah, I mean, easy. I know how to play the game.
Yeah, and your skills and attributes, if they're applicable, can be applied to your role as a bonus. So like if it's charging up against a dragon and you have the skill for sword and you have the ability for courage, then you'd get a +4. So you're going to probably roll pretty good. There's 5 different classes: knight, noble, hunter, sorcerer, bard. They have access to different skills. You get virtues and vices. You get 1 virtue, 1 vice, and you could use those as sort of like a parachute, basically. Like you could use it to re-roll something, or you could use it to help a buddy. So if your dishonor value gets to 20, you're out of the game.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so like you don't worry about dying. There's no health. There's none of that. So it's like this interesting like moral role-playing system. The weird thing about the game, I can't tell if this is by design or by, needing to get it out. But the game runs at a series of encounters. Basically, you establish initiative, right, for every encounter. Each encounter is sort of like a random encounter on the road, but also a moral conundrum. As soon as the encounter starts, everybody gets 1 dishonor point because they're delaying in their promise to get to the Green Knight.
Okay.
You're already under the gun, right? Now, when you're acting in the encounter, the first one is an ambush with some bandits. And they've already ambushed some peasants, and one of them has run off. And the bandits don't want to attack you, but they want you to find the guy. And they use an enchanted mace to kind of convince you to help them. And you have to kind of navigate this thing. And you would think that that would play out, in the role-playing, and then you would make actions. But that's not how it works. So once the encounter starts, you roll an initiative. And the person who's first is the leader for the encounter, and then everybody has an action in order, like initiative. But you're locked, and you can only end the encounter once the leader says so. And every time it goes through initiative and you start a new round, you get another point of dishonor for delaying.
So you could feasibly rack up dishonor points just by actually doing the combat.
Yes.
And you can get to a point where you're out of the game a lot faster and lose by just being in the combat.
Yeah. So every action that you take, you're either going to get a dishonor point or an honor point. So there is a little bit of mitigation within the encounter, but the game is always racking up time against you. And the thing that makes it even weirder is that you only get to act in order. So you're sort of trapped by the actions of the people who precede you. So if the first person in initiative order is just like, I attack the bandits, you're kind of stuck with that. Like you can't just drop out of combat and like investigate the scene of the crime now. And at the same time, like you get clues that might not help the next guy. It's sort of stilted. I do kind of think it's by design, though, because it feels sort of cinematic and surreal, because it forces you to make decisions that you wouldn't necessarily want to make, right? And because these things are sort of like hyper-real encounters where like your honor is at stake, it almost feels like your actions are playing through like tarot cards that you're drawing. So everything's like weird and not right. And like I think that it just creates like a very strange play space where you might know the right answer as a player, but the way the game is structured, it is constantly kind of putting you in difficult situations mechanically. And I think that's really interesting. I think it's a little rough, but it's a very simple system that I think accomplishes a lot, way more out of proportion with what I expected for a tie-in to a movie,
Well, yeah, because it sounds like it's taking the metagaming aspect out of an RPG, where you're right, like in a normal combat in like D&D, while X is happening, you are going to be like, well, I would do this, 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 and this. Whereas here, you're like, I'm kind of stuck in this scene. So I have to play out this scene, and I can't just go off in my own direction as an agent of chaos during this combat.
Yeah, totally. There's no way to optimize the party as a group. You're always stuck with what is my decision and what is the consequence for it. It really just keeps you forced to keep your head down and focus in on your honor versus your dishonor. And like the actions of the rest of the group are less important. It makes it very internal, really. I think it's cool. It reminds me a lot of Pendragon, obviously because of the Arthurian theming, but also in the approach to the system. I think that they really wanted to do something that spoke to how these alien ideas of honor interact. And like, you don't get that because you don't have the underpinnings. Like, we just don't. We don't know how to like play a game about honor, like medieval romantic honor, because we just don't have the context for it. But by putting this sort of stilted system in place, it does something that simulates something sort of like that by making you make decisions that you wouldn't necessarily want to make.
Well, to take it back to something you said earlier in the episode, we, just generally as a society, don't understand that Arthurian romantic style of honor and dishonor.
Yeah.
And we haven't really had a solid reference for that in cinema in decades. Like, it's not something you see when you go to the movies anymore, or even when you're putting on like television, watching it on cable. So for all of that, you also look at it like the average person picking this up who might be like, oh, cool, I play D&D. I want to try this game out. It might not work for them. Like, it's kind of like an apple and an orange, because the things that you instinctually want to do as a player who's played any edition of Dungeons & Dragons, who's played any amount of time of that Dungeons & Dragons, whether you're just starting out or whether you've been playing for a while, it doesn't sound like it jives with what you're allowed to do in this game. And I think that's kind of cool. I think it kind of creates a new type of role-playing experience, because it sounds like you're on the rails, but with the best intentions.
Yeah. And when you get down to it, the poem, and it looks like the substance of the movie, is psychodrama. The events of the world aren't important. They're probably not even real. They're probably a manifestation of what's going on inside the character's head in a lot of ways. So, like, again, this really forces you to just think about your character. Not selfishly. It's just that that's the only tools that you have to interface with the world are you making, like, moral decisions. It just removes this sense of expediency. Like, you just can't do the things that will move this along. You're not making decisions in a dramatic sense. You're making them on a personal sense. You know what I mean?
It absolutely does make sense. And being that it's based on the movie, is all the artwork stills from the movie or taken from the movie?
There's no photography in it, which is nice. That keeps with the vibe. They did send a nice postcard of Dev Patel. That's the only photograph, though. Everything else is an illustration.
Very cool. I like that. Keeps that nice, like, classic RPG vibe.
Yeah, the one misstep, I think, in the design is that they put some faux aging on it. So, like, there's, like, scuff marks, you know, quote-unquote scuff marks. And it's just like, I'm going to scuff this up on my own. like, I get what you're doing. Like, you're trying to appeal to, like, a nostalgia vibe. But overall, I don't love it when RPGs are used as a marketing tool, but I do like a lot of licensed games. This feels like it's somewhere in between the two. It's really interesting, and they worked real hard to make a game that is not just a D&D clone with, you know, the movie skin on top of it. It's interesting and warrants play.
Very cool, Stu. So I definitely want to check this game out. If you want to check this game out too, dear listener, you could probably find it at your friendly local gaming store or wherever games are found. Or you can get it direct from A24, which is awesome.
You could do a whole lot worse for $35.
There you go. So this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
I don't know where they can find me, Hambone. No, they can find me on Instagram at VintageRPG, where I'm posting about role-playing games every day. Games like The Green Knight and other weird movie tie-ins sometimes.
Very cool. You can find me on the Twitter at Handbreaker. I tweet about board games. I tweet about cute animals. I tweet about Dungeons & Dragons. If you like the podcast, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, because your reviews do help other listeners to find us. If you like the podcast, definitely think about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got a ton of cool extra stuff happening over there, including videos, early release episodes, access to a Patreon-only Discord, and some more fun stuff that we just can't talk about yet. So thanks for checking out this episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. For Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.